Hi, I'm Rick, and I like to make tiny trees. In today's video, we have a Adenium of some sort. It's a Adenium Baobab. So I think it's still the Adenium cultivar, but it's a Baobab. Essentially, I've already got one of these as well. I've got a bigger one, but these kind of grow really wide at the bottom, and then they kind of instead of like elongating like a normal Adenium would, they kind of just shoot off loads of branches near the base, so you can make quite a miniature kind of style tree out of them. And obviously the trunk's always nice and thick to start with. So there isn't actually much work to do in terms of branching on this, but there is a lot of work to do in terms of the root ball. So obviously with Adeniums, the rule is that you kind of let them dry out for a good week or two before you try and repot them, to make sure it's completely dry soil. Any kind of like moisture to cut roots is going to probably lead to root rot. So I've let this one dry out, but then as I realised when I pulled it out of the pot, the roots are only taking up half the pot anyway. And it's a weird mixture. It's like it is like a cocoa coir mix, but then it's got like coconut kind of shells in it. That's what they call it, that husk. And obviously it's good for draining, but that doesn't allow the roots to grow any further. So this one probably wouldn't have. It's not any good for draining, so this one probably wouldn't have grew any more roots than what is growing already. So wanted to get this in a bit better soil and kind of go from there. So it hasn't got a terrible root base. I found with my other Adenium, they grow like really thick roots like ficus do, which is a bit of an issue. But this one doesn't seem too bad. It's got quite a lot of fine rooting. So I'm just using a plastic kind of comb here to sift through some of the roots and try and pick out as much soil as possible. I wouldn't say I've had terrible. I wouldn't say I've had too much good luck with Adeniums in the past. I've still got my other Baobab, which is still okay, but it keeps on dropping leaves and regrowing, dropping, regrowing. It doesn't stay strong for long. It also had a scale infection, so loads of scale in it for some reason. I don't know how scale actually survive off the sap of this, because it is poisonous. It is a poisonous plant, and you have to make sure you wash your hands and tools after you work with them. It has already got some quite nice branches. I mean, this won't be a big tree at all. I'm looking to keep this really small. Eventually cut down that main leader there and try and form an apex off of that. They wire pretty well as well. You can actually wire Adeniums, and they kind of hold shape. For a succulent, they're not too bad. But yeah, I had a couple of baby obesums, I call them, like, so grown from seed, and I think I had 3 of them at one point, and all 3 died. And then there was another one which nearly died due to root rot. I managed to cut the top off and then planted the top, and it's taken about 6 months, but I believe it's rooted because it started growing new leaves, and I'll show that in another video at some point. See, I don't have the greatest of luck with these, so I've had to do a lot of research to kind of figure out what I can and can't do to them, and just keep on trying with them, I suppose. And they say it's ideal to hang these up before putting them back in new soil to try and dry the roots out even more. I haven't really got anywhere to hang it up, so I did actually, at the end of the video you'll see, but I did actually put it back up into soil, but the soil that I put it into is completely dry. Like, I dried it out for a good 5 days on top of a radiator. So there shouldn't be anything that can cause root rot in there, and since this repot has kind of bounced back a little, and it seems okay for now, so we'll go from there. So sometimes with Adenium, scissors aren't really a great way to go about cutting them. They scar quite easily. And usually the best way is actually a Stanley blade. So for some of these bigger kind of roots, I'm trying to thin them out with a Stanley blade rather than just scissors. It leaves a clean cut and it means less infection as well, because these things can get infected quite easily. And this kind of goes against all kind of bonsai rules when it comes to branching and stuff. Obviously, usually it's, you know, you don't want any branches from one place, but nearly all the branches are coming from one place in this. But I'm okay with that. It's kind of the way the tree is, and I'm eventually going to try and make this look like some kind of baobab tree. So it kind of fits with it. So what I'm doing here is just sprinkling some of this drier soil directly onto the cut sites. So you can't really use cut paste, and they do bleed a lot of Adeniums. So the only way you can really stop the bleeding and try and stop infection, I suppose, is trying to sprinkle some dry soil onto the bottom. You can use antifungal paste. I don't have any, so this is my best solution. So again, just making sure I'm collecting as much of that dry soil at the bottom as I can, and then placing the tree on top of that. Now obviously, because of this is quite a top heavy tree like most succulents are, the trunk's actually holding a lot of water, and obviously there is no root ball anymore to keep it in the pot. Once I backfill this a little bit, I'm going to keep it down with some kind of guy wires, like just a couple of wires. Luckily I've got a lot of branches that I can use as anchor points. And that's just to make sure that obviously there isn't too much movement. If you've got movement in your pot, the roots can't grow. So I've been calling this Adenium the whole video. Some people know it as a snow rose as well. This is supposed to grow flowers. I've never had mine flower in the UK. I believe the baobab ones don't flower as much as the obesum, but I might be incorrect there. My bigger obesum I actually bought while it was flowering, and since then it hasn't flowered, obviously. You know, most of the time with store-bought things, they kind of they force them to grow flowers. Obviously, then it makes people want to buy them, makes them more attractive. But yeah, we shall see if we can ever get this to flower. I'll see it with like jades and Portugal Afra as well. In places like Australia, South Africa, they're flowering. I've never seen a flowering one in the UK personally. I just don't think we've got the sunlight or the temperatures they need. So this is where I start making my holes for my guy wires. Obviously just using a little Stanley blade there, poke little holes in. And I'm only going to be using, I think it's 0.5mm wire. Very, very thin wire. It's just to keep it in place for the time being. And I won't water this now until it starts showing new growth really. So could be a month, could be 2 months. You never know. As I said, of that cutting I took, I hadn't watered that for probably 3 months. And then I started watering it. And then it finally showed new signs of growth. So you can also test by like trying to squeeze the trunk a little bit, because these are succulents. They are like 90% water, let's say. When you try and squeeze the trunk, you'll notice if it's a bit soft, that could be a problem. It could be root rot. If there's no like discoloration, that usually means that it's just drying out. And that's a good time to water it. If it's full, like it's absolutely rock solid, I'd leave it. There's no point of watering it, because the trees won't take up any more water and it's just going to sit in the pot. Now my other baobab Adenium is already in a bonsai container with bonsai soil as well, so that's quite free draining. and that actually sits on a windowsill near to a radiator, not above it. So some of my tropicals that like to dry out quickly or don't mind being dry, jades and stuff, I put them close to the radiator, and I keep my ficus and stuff that likes to be a little bit wetter further back. So them ones dry out every day anyway, so it isn't like a sitting in water kind of situation. Also the mix I use, I think I use 50% lava, 50% pumice with no akadama, because I find that akadama is the one thing that holds a lot of water. Obviously it breaks down over time as well, turns to dust, and then that's where you start getting really soggy soil. Now, obviously I will have to be careful with these wires. If a tree tries to grow, these could cut in, and on a succulent you're never going to get rid of that scar. As I said earlier, I do find Adeniums kind of scar in a strange way. They kind of remind me of ginkgos. If you've ever cut a ginkgo, then the cut site never really heals. It doesn't really heal over. It just kind of, yeah, I don't know how to put it. You'll always see the cut basically. It isn't like a normal tree. I suppose that's part of being succulent. So this was actually being sold in my local Long Acres, and it was actually quite expensive. I think this is about £17 just for this, which is quite expensive for the kind of tree you get. But I find that you don't find these in shops very often. Long Acres have had them a couple of times before. It's actually where I got 2 other Adeniums from, but not the Baobab kind of style. My other Baobab I got off of eBay. So when you find them, you just kind of nab them. There was actually 5 or 6 the week before I actually bought this, and I thought I'll leave them for now because I didn't want to, spend £100 on 5 or 6 different Adeniums. And when I went back, like, fortunate for me, this is the only one left, and it's actually one of the best shaped ones as well that I saw. There was one that was slightly bigger, which I am a bit annoyed that I didn't get at the time, but sometimes these things happen, right? So I'm interested to know if anyone has any kind of weird and wonderful tropical species that they bonsai'd. If you want to put them in the comments below. I'm very much into like rare plants or strange plants as well. Obviously I have got my outdoor typical kind of trees, Chinese elms, everything else, but the longer I go into my bonsai journey, the more I'm trying to find the weird and wonderful, which is kind of why I've started getting, Brazilian rain trees and cat's claws mimosas and going off the beaten path a little bit, because I like the weird and wonderful. We're just taking a final little look here, or a couple final looks, should I say. And I'm going to make a decision here whether to cut some branches or not. Now there are some branches that are growing directly underneath others, and that's a bit of an issue for me. Especially as my indoor trees are kind of under grow light, so branches will need all the bit of light they can get. And you'll probably see on the video here fairly quickly that these start to bleed instantly. The sap just starts to run out. That's kind of how active this tree is. There you go, there's a drop on the right there. And obviously this is quite toxic as well, so you have to be very careful. It can actually stain the trunk as well, but that's something else I can look into another time. Now you might notice here there's obviously one central kind of leader just pushing up, and it kind of makes it look a little bit strange. What will happen is, once it regains a bit of strength, I'll cut that leader off, and then I'll use side branches to build an apex from that. Just so it doesn't look like one towering kind of apex. And a little close up here of how it looks after all that. So as you can see, very thick base. We'll go from there.